You have 72 hours to remove the livestock. The voice on the phone was sharp, brittle, like old plastic left in the sun too long. It belonged to Brenda, the self-appointed empress of the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association. I looked out my kitchen window at the livestock in question. Henrietta, Petunia, and Gladys, my 3 hens, were currently engaged in a very serious investigation of a grub near the azalea bush. They were less livestock and more feathered garden gnomes with a penchant for fresh eggs. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked, playing dumb. It was a small pleasure, but one I allowed myself. A sigh crackled through the receiver, heavy with the weight of someone burdened by the incompetence of the entire world. "This is Brenda from the Architectural Control Committee. Your chickens. They are a violation of Covenant 74, subsection B. No livestock. They need to be gone." End of story. This, right here, was the moment everything started. It was the first shovelful of dirt in a grave she was happily digging for herself. She just didn't know that I was the one who would eventually hand her the shovel and tell her to dig faster. But that's getting ahead of myself. For more stories about getting back at petty tyrants, make sure you subscribe. What would you do if your neighbor tried to take away your beloved pets? My name is Arthur Pendleton. I'm a retired civil engineer and city planner. For 40 years, I designed infrastructure, wrote zoning ordinances, and navigated the labyrinthine world of municipal bureaucracy. I understood rules better than most people understood their own children. After my wife, Eleanor, passed away, I sold our large family home and bought this smaller place in Northwood Estates. The goal was simple, quiet. I wanted to be closer to my daughter and her kids, tend a small garden, read history books, and enjoy the fruits of a long career. The 3 hens were a gift from my granddaughter, a 4-H project that had run its course. They were calm, quiet, and provided me with the best eggs I'd ever tasted. They were my companions in the quiet morning hours. Northwood Estates was, on the surface, the perfect place for this quiet life. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a sense of orderly calm. But beneath that placid surface, a current of petty tyranny flowed, and its source was Brenda. She wasn't the HOA president, merely the chair of the most powerful committee, which she wielded like a scepter. She was a woman who seemed to draw sustenance from the misery of others, a real estate agent who believed curb appeal was more important than human decency. She drove a pristine white SUV that was always parked perfectly between the lines, a mobile throne from which she surveyed her kingdom for violations. Her call was the inciting incident, the first tremor before the earthquake. I had read the HOA covenants cover to cover before I bought the house. I had also read the city ordinances. In fact, I had written one of them. Specifically, the one that defined the difference between agricultural livestock and household pets, and that ordinance, a beautiful piece of bureaucratic prose if I do say so myself, explicitly permitted up to 6 hens per residential lot under a quarter acre. My lot was 1/3 of an acre. My 3 hens were as legally sound as the foundation of my house. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm and measured, the same voice I used to use on contractors trying to cut corners on a concrete pour. "I appreciate you calling. However, my hens are not classified as livestock under City Ordinance 1138. They are considered household pets, same as a cat or a dog." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, trying to process a response that wasn't immediate, furious agreement. The HOA covenants supersede city ordinances. And our rules say no livestock. That's a common misconception, but it's incorrect, I replied, feeling a small spark of the old professional satisfaction. An HOA cannot enforce a rule that directly contravenes municipal law. It's a matter of legal hierarchy. I'd be happy to send you the relevant statute. The line went silent for a beat too long. "You will remove the chickens, Mr. Pendleton," she finally spat, her voice dropping the thin veneer of politeness. "Or you will face fines. Daily fines. And I will see to it that you regret moving into my neighborhood." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, and watched Henrietta peck triumphantly at her vanquished grub. Brenda had just declared war. She thought she was fighting a quiet old man. She had no idea she was fighting the men who had written the rules of engagement. The game was on. The first official letter arrived 2 days later, tucked neatly under the wiper blade of my car. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the Northwood Estates HOA logo. It felt important, heavy with the self-importance of its author. The letter formally cited me for the violation and levied a $50 fine. It also stated that the fine would double for every day that livestock remained on the property. It was signed with a flourish by Brenda, Chairperson, Architectural Control Committee. I chuckled. It was a well-crafted threat, I had to give her that. But its foundation was sand. I took the letter inside, scanned it, and filed it away in a new folder on my computer I labeled Brenda's Folly. Then, I drafted a response. My letter was the polar opposite of hers. It was printed on plain white paper. It was concise, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. I cited the city ordinance again, including the full text as an appendix. I cited the state laws regarding the supremacy of municipal code over private covenants. I politely informed her that her fine was legally unenforceable and that I would not be paying it. I also informed her that any further communication on this matter should be in writing. I wanted a paper trail. A long one. I mailed it via certified post. Overkill. Absolutely. But in my line of work, you learned that overkill was just another word for thorough. You built bridges to withstand a 100-year flood, not a summer shower. I was building my case against Brenda with the same principle. A week passed in blissful silence. I started to think, foolishly, that maybe logic had prevailed. Maybe she had consulted a lawyer who had told her she was standing on shaky ground and advised her to drop it. I should have known better. Tyrants don't yield to logic, they just regroup and find a bigger hammer. The bigger hammer arrived in the form of the neighborhood's private Facebook group. A post from Brenda appeared, a masterclass in passive-aggressive slander. A friendly reminder to all residents, it began innocently enough. Northwood Estates prides itself on being a clean, safe, and prestigious community. To that end, our covenants prohibit the keeping of farm animals. This is for health reasons, to prevent pests, and to maintain our property values. Unfortunately, some new residents may not share our commitment to these standards. Please be vigilant and report any violations. We must all work together to protect our investment. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. I was the only person in our 200-home subdivision with chickens. The comments section exploded. Is this about the new guy on Chestnut Street? I thought I heard clucking. Farm animals. In Northwood. That's disgusting. Think of the smell. My realtor, Brenda, told me how important these rules were for keeping our values high. Thank you for staying on top of this, Brenda. My quiet little corner of the world was suddenly the subject of public debate. My character was being assassinated by people who had never even spoken to me. They painted me as some kind of hayseed hick, turning my manicured lawn into a barnyard. The reality was a coop cleaner than most people's kitchens and 3 hens that made less noise than the yappy poodle 2 doors down. This was escalation. She had failed to intimidate me privately, so now she was trying to shame me publicly. She was turning the community against me. I felt a cold knot of anger tighten in my stomach. This was no longer about 3 chickens. This was about a bully using her power to harass and isolate someone for sport. I didn't respond to the post. Engaging in an online flame war was a fool's errand. Instead, I saved a complete copy of the web page, including all the comments. It went into the Brenda's Folly folder, right next to the fine notice. The file was getting thicker. The next phase of her attack was more direct. A city animal control truck pulled up to my curb one afternoon. A young, weary-looking officer got out and walked up my driveway. I met him on the porch. "Sir, we got a call about illegal livestock," he said, looking past me toward the coop in the backyard. "My hens?" I asked calmly. "They're perfectly legal. City Ordinance 1138-inch. He sighed. "That's the 3rd time this week I've had to explain that ordinance to someone." "Let me guess, call came from a Brenda." I nodded. "Yeah," he said, shaking his head. "She calls constantly. About everything. Lawn gnomes, basketball hoops, cars parked on the street for more than an hour. We have a file on her. Honestly, sir, your setup looks immaculate from here. As long as you've got fewer than 6 birds and it's clean, we don't have a problem. Sorry to have bothered you." He got back in his truck and drove away. I watched him go, and the anger I felt began to cool, replaced by something harder. Something more methodical. She was wasting city resources. She was filing false reports. This was a pattern of harassment. I called my daughter, Sarah, that evening. I had tried to keep this from her, not wanting to worry her. But after the animal control visit, I needed to talk. "Dad, this is insane," she said after I explained everything. "She sounds like a nightmare. You should just get rid of the chickens. It's not worth the stress." "No," I said, and the word came out with more force than I expected. "No. It's not about the chickens anymore, Sarah. It's about the principle. This woman is a bully. She's running that neighborhood like her own private fiefdom. What happens next time? She doesn't like the color of my mailbox. She doesn't like that my grandkids are making too much noise when they visit. Where does it stop?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "When you said that about the kids," Sarah said softly, "it made me nervous. Are you sure you're safe?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right to be worried. A person this obsessed with control, this willing to lie and harass, was unpredictable. And that's when it happened. That was the turning point. The moment my daughter expressed fear for her children's safety because of this woman's vendetta against me, something inside me shifted. The peace-seeking retiree who just wanted a quiet life was gone. In his place stood the city planner, the engineer. The man who looked at a problem, analyzed its structural weaknesses, and designed a solution. Brenda was a problem. A poorly designed, unstable structure. And I was about to conduct a full structural analysis. I was going to find every crack, every weak point, every bit of shoddy workmanship. And then, I was going to bring the whole thing down. The first step in any project is gathering data. My quiet retirement was officially over. I was now on a fact-finding mission. The objective: understand the source of Brenda's power and identify its vulnerabilities. I started with the HOA itself. I submitted a formal, written request for all of the association's governing documents, meeting minutes for the past 5 years, and, most importantly, the complete financial records. As a homeowner, I was legally entitled to them. I knew this would set off alarms for Brenda, but it was a necessary move. It was the equivalent of setting up survey markers before an excavation. While I waited for the inevitable pushback on that front, I turned my attention to Brenda herself. I was an engineer, not a detective, but the principles of investigation are similar. You start with public records. Property deeds, tax assessments, business licenses. The internet is a wonderful, terrifying tool. It didn't take long to paint a picture. Brenda was not just a real estate agent, she owned the brokerage. A small, boutique firm called Prestige Homes Realty, and a quick cross-reference of property sales in Northwood Estates revealed a startling pattern. Over 70% of the homes sold in the last 5 years had been handled by her agency. That was an unusually high market share. It smelled fishy, like a retaining wall built with the wrong aggregate mix. It might look fine on the surface, but the internal integrity was questionable. My next stop was the city planning department, my old stomping grounds. I spent an afternoon poring over the original plat maps and development plans for Northwood Estates. I knew what to look for: easements, setbacks, common areas. I printed out a high-resolution copy of the master plan for the entire subdivision. It was like finding an old, familiar blueprint. That evening, I got a call from Frank, a retired police detective who lived 3 streets over. He was a gruff, no-nonsense guy I'd gotten to know over the fence while discussing the merits of different tomato fertilizers. "Heard you're rattling Brenda's cage," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good. Someone needs to. That woman's been a thorn in this neighborhood's side for years." "Just asking a few questions," I said carefully. "I've got a buddy who still works in the economic crimes unit," Frank offered. "If you find anything that looks like financial misconduct, let me know. He owes me a favor." Just saying. Frank was my first ally. A crucial piece of support infrastructure. I filed his offer away for later. The HOA, through Brenda, predictably denied my request for financial records, citing privacy concerns. It was a nonsense excuse, and she knew it. It was a stall tactic. So, I sent a second letter, this one co-signed by a lawyer I had on retainer. It quoted the exact state statute that mandated transparency and gave them 10 business days to comply before I filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general. The tone was no longer polite. The survey markers were in place, now it was time to bring in the light equipment. While that legal clock was ticking, I focused on the map. I spent a weekend doing something I hadn't done in years. I got out my old surveying transit and measuring chain. My neighbors probably thought I was crazy, the old man out in his yard with what looked like a telescope on a tripod. I was meticulously resurveying my own property lines, and then, under the cover of a quiet Sunday morning, the property lines of the common area bordering Brenda's house. And then I found it. It was beautiful. A perfect, undeniable, catastrophic flaw in her design. Brenda's backyard was her pride and joy. She had posted pictures of it in the neighborhood newsletter. It featured a massive, multi-level stone patio, an ornate water feature, and a custom-built pergola dripping with wisteria. It was the centerpiece of the prestigious lifestyle she was selling. According to the official plat map, a full third of that glorious patio, including the entire water feature and one of the main supports for the pergola, was not on her property. It was built on HOA common ground. She, the high priestess of architectural control and property lines, had violated the most fundamental rule of all. She had built a massive, unapproved structure on land that belonged to all of us. The irony was so thick I could have used it for grout. This was the weakness. This was the crack in the foundation. It was evidence of her hypocrisy, a physical manifestation of her belief that the rules were for everyone else. I took precise measurements. I photographed the survey markers. I drew up a new, annotated map that clearly showed the encroachment. I documented everything with the dispassionate precision of an engineering report. This single discovery shifted the entire landscape of the conflict. I now had leverage. The turning point had been emotional, a protective instinct for my family. But the investigation, this discovery, was cold, hard, and logical. It felt good. It felt like progress. It was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't just going to win. I was going to dismantle her entire empire, brick by fraudulent brick. The data was collected. Now it was time to formulate the plan. A good plan, like a good bridge, has to be designed for the load it will bear. My plan wasn't just about winning a fight over chickens, it was about achieving a kind of poetic justice. It was about using Brenda's own weapons, the rules, the covenants, the obsession with appearances, against her. I laid it all out on my drafting table, the same one where I designed culverts and road grades for 40 years. This was just a different kind of civil engineering project. Phase 1, the bait. Brenda was arrogant. Her arrogance was her primary structural flaw. I needed to use that. I needed to bait her into overplaying her hand, into creating an incident I could document. My chickens were the perfect bait. I decided to double down on the chickens. I didn't add more, of course. That would be a genuine violation. Instead, I improved their living situation. I built a small, attractive picket fence around their run, something you might see in a country living magazine. I planted some flowers around the coop. I made it look ridiculously, charmingly idyllic. It was a deliberate, aesthetic poke in the eye. I wanted her to see it every time she drove past, a beautiful, well-maintained, and utterly infuriating symbol of my defiance. To document her reaction, I installed a series of small, high-definition security cameras. They were discreet, nestled under the eaves of my house and garage. One had a perfect, clear view of my front yard and driveway. Another covered the side of the house where the chicken coop was located. They recorded high-quality video and audio. In the world of rules and regulations, documentation is king. I was preparing to have a royal flush. Phase 2, the financial front. My lawyer's letter had worked. A thick manila envelope arrived from the HOA's management company. It contained 5 years of financial statements, budgets, and expense reports. They had redacted some information, but it was enough to get started. I spent the next 3 nights at my dining room table, a pot of coffee at my elbow, poring over the numbers. It was tedious work, but my career had trained me to find anomalies in spreadsheets the way a predator spots a limp in a herd. And the anomalies were there. They were subtle at first. Landscaping contracts, for instance. The HOA paid a company called Greenscape Solutions a shockingly high monthly fee for basic lawn mowing and shrub trimming. The fees had increased by 20% every year for the past 3 years, far outpacing inflation or any reasonable business cost. There were also numerous special projects, tree removal, sprinkler repair, fence painting, all awarded to the same handful of companies, all for suspiciously round numbers. I did a business search for Greenscape Solutions. The registered agent was a man named Martin Gables. The address was a post office box. A little more digging, a few cross-references with public social media profiles, and I hit pay dirt. Martin Gables was Brenda's brother-in-law. The other companies were harder to trace, set up as anonymous LLCs. But the pattern was clear. It screamed kickbacks and bid rigging. She wasn't just a power-hungry tyrant, she was using the HOA as her personal ATM. She was funding her prestigious lifestyle with her neighbor's money. Phase 3, the physical front. This was my ace in the hole. The property line encroachment. I had my survey, my photos, my annotated map. This piece of evidence was irrefutable. But it had to be deployed at the right moment. It was the keystone in the arch of my plan. To use it too early would be a waste. I needed to wait until she was off balance, until she felt cornered. Then, and only then, would I reveal it. The plan was multifaceted, designed to attack her on all fronts, her authority, her finances, and her public image. Each piece was designed to weaken the others, a cascading failure. I felt a cold, calm satisfaction as I looked at my notes, the blueprints for her downfall. This wasn't about anger anymore. Anger is a hot, inefficient emotion. This was about justice. It was about restoring order. Brenda had created a system of chaotic, arbitrary rule. I was going to replace it with one of logic, evidence, and consequences. I sat back in my chair and took a sip of my now cold coffee. Outside, the sun was rising. Henrietta gave a soft, contented cluck from the coop. The bait was set. The trap was designed. Now, all I had to do was wait for the quarry to walk into it. And I knew, with the certainty of a perfectly calculated stress load, that she would. Her pride would guarantee it. It took less than a week for the trap to spring. The new picket fence around the chicken run broke her. It was, to her, the ultimate insult. Not just defiance, but cheerful, aesthetically pleasing defiance. It was a declaration that I was not only staying but improving my corner of her kingdom without her permission. My cameras captured it all. Her white SUV slowed to a crawl as it passed my house one afternoon. It stopped. She got out, phone in hand, and began taking pictures of the fence, the coop, the hens. Her face was a mask of thunderous rage. It was exactly the reaction I had hoped for. 2 days later, another official letter arrived. This one was practically vibrating with fury. It cited me for an unapproved structural modification, the tiny, 2-foot-high picket fence. It included a new fine of $500, plus the now astronomical daily fines for the chickens. And it contained a new threat. Failure to remove the illegal livestock and the unapproved fencing within 48 hours will result in the HOA taking action to remove them for you, at your expense. This was it. This was the critical error. She had moved from empty threats and unenforceable fines to a direct promise of property damage and theft. She had just incriminated herself, on official, embossed letterhead. And she had delivered the evidence right to my mailbox. I scanned the letter and saved it to the folder, which I had mentally renamed, the prosecution's Exhibit A. The next evening, I made my first public move. The HOA had a monthly meeting, a sad, poorly attended affair in the clubhouse community room. Usually, only Brenda and her 2 cronies on the committee, a timid woman named Carol and a grumpy man named George, were there. But this time, I had made a few calls. Frank, the retired detective, was there. A few other neighbors I'd spoken to, who had their own grievances with Brenda, had also promised to show up. I waited until the new business portion of the agenda. Then I stood up. Arthur Pendleton, 12 Chestnut Street, I said calmly. I have a question for the Architectural Control Committee. Brenda's eyes narrowed. This is not the forum for individual compliance issues, Mr. Pendleton. This is a question about HOA policy and property rights, I countered, holding up her latest letter. I received this communication, which threatens to have HOA contracted agents enter my private property to remove personal belongings. My question is this: under what provision in our bylaws does the HOA grant itself the right to commit breaking and entering, and theft? A murmur went through the small crowd. Frank leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. It is not theft to remove an illegal nuisance that is in violation of the covenants. So, the committee believes it can unilaterally decide a homeowner's property is a nuisance, and then enter their property and seize it? I asked, letting the question hang in the air. Without a court order. Without due process. George, one of her cronies, cleared his throat. Now, hold on, she's just saying we'll hire someone to. To do what, George? I cut in, my voice still level. To trespass. That's the legal term for it. And to take property that doesn't belong to you. That's called larceny. These are crimes. Is the committee now in the business of hiring criminals to enforce its rules? The room was silent. I had framed the argument in terms they couldn't refute. I wasn't arguing about the chickens. I was arguing about fundamental legal principles. Brenda slammed her gavel on the table. This is out of order. Your violations are the issue here, not some hypothetical legal nonsense. It's not hypothetical when you put it in writing, I said, holding the letter up again. This is a direct, written threat to violate the law. I just want to know if the entire board endorses this policy of criminal action before I forward this letter to the district attorney's office and my insurance company. That was the first reveal. The first card turned over. I had shown her, and the handful of neighbors present, that I was not going to be intimidated and that I understood the law better than she did. I had exposed the rotten core of her tactics. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She didn't back down. She didn't apologize. She exploded. You are a troublemaker, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You come into our beautiful neighborhood and you mock our rules, you disrespect our standards. I will not be threatened by you. You will get rid of those disgusting birds, or you will find out just how serious I can be. This meeting is adjourned. She banged the gavel again and stormed out of the room, her two flunkies trailing in her wake like pilot fish. I hadn't won the war, not even close. But I had won the first major battle. She had lost her composure in a public setting. She had confirmed her intent to act illegally. She had shown everyone the tyrant behind the committee chairperson mask. Her social credibility was cracked. Her power, however, was still intact. But I had a blueprint to take care of that, too. The trap had been sprung, and the animal was now wounded, angry, and cornered. Which meant it was about to get much, much more dangerous. A cornered animal is a predictable one. It lashes out. Brenda, having been publicly humiliated and legally challenged, did exactly that. She escalated from petty harassment to a full-blown, vicious smear campaign. She was no longer trying to just remove my chickens, she was trying to remove me. The neighborhood Facebook group became her battlefield. The passive-aggressive posts were replaced by outright lies. I was accused of running an illegal egg-selling business from my home, creating traffic and attracting strangers into the neighborhood. One post hinted darkly about the risk of salmonella and avian flu from my unregulated farm, painting me as a public health menace. It was libel, plain and simple. Each post was screenshotted, dated, and added to the file. Then, she stooped lower. She started targeting my family. My daughter, Sarah, would bring my grandkids over on weekends. They loved feeding the chickens and running around in the backyard. One Monday, Sarah called me, her voice shaking with rage. "Dad, you need to see this," she said. She sent me a screenshot of a new post from Brenda. It was a picture of my grandchildren in my front yard, taken from the street. The caption read, "It's a shame that some people's grandchildren have to play near a smelly, pest-infested chicken coop. We need to think about the health and safety of the children in our community." A cold fire ignited in my chest. This was a line that should never have been crossed. She had photographed my grandchildren without permission and used their images to further her vendetta. All the methodical planning, all the dispassionate analysis, evaporated for a moment, replaced by a pure, protective fury. This woman was not just a bully, she was vile. That was the moment I decided to accelerate the timetable. Phase 3 of the plan, the property line encroachment, was now in play. I drafted another letter. This one was addressed to the HOA Board of Directors, care of its president, a quiet man who was completely under Brenda's thumb. I also copied the letter to every single homeowner in Northwood Estates. I paid a high school kid $100 to walk the neighborhood and put a copy in every mailbox. It was an expensive, brute force method of communication, but I wanted to ensure Brenda couldn't control the narrative. The letter was a masterpiece of civil engineering jargon applied to petty tyranny. It began, subject, analysis of nonconforming structural encroachment on common area property at 45 Willow Lane, Brenda's address. It went on to detail, with surveyor-level precision, the illegal construction of her patio, water feature, and pergola on community land. I included the annotated plat map I had created, showing the clear violation. I attached photographs of my survey markers. I cited the exact same covenants she had been using against me, the ones demanding committee approval for any and all exterior modifications. I formally requested copies of the approval application and permit for her massive patio project. Of course, I knew they didn't exist. And then came the final paragraph. As this unapproved structure poses a potential liability risk to the association and all its members, and as it represents a significant and ongoing violation of the very covenants the chairperson of the Architectural Control Committee is tasked with enforcing, I demand that the HOA board take immediate action. This action must include the complete removal of the encroaching structures and the restoration of the common area to its original condition, at the homeowner's expense, within 30 days. I used her own words against her. Removal, at your expense, it was perfect. The letter landed like a bomb. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors. Some were confused. Some were angry at her. A few were angry at me for causing trouble, but no one could deny the evidence. It was on the map, in black and white. Her hypocrisy was laid bare for the entire community to see. The backlash against her was immediate and severe. The Facebook group, her personal propaganda machine, turned on her. People were furious that their HOA dues were maintaining a common area she had illegally commandeered for a private resort. They were furious at the blatant hypocrisy. But Brenda's most vicious retaliation was yet to come. Feeling her power base crumble, she made a desperate, ugly move. She tried to get me fired. Or, more accurately, she tried to ruin my professional reputation, which was the only thing I had left that resembled a job. I did some part-time consulting for the city and a few private development firms, reviewing plans and offering expert opinions. It kept my mind sharp. She sent a letter to the city manager and the principals of the firms I worked with. It was a wild, rambling tirade, accusing me of unethical conduct, harassment, and, using my former position to intimidate law-abiding citizens, she painted me as a corrupt ex-bureaucrat, a crank who was terrorizing his neighborhood. It was a desperate gambit, and it failed spectacularly. My reputation was solid, built over 40 years of honest work. The people I consulted for knew me. They read her unhinged letter, recognized it for the nonsense it was, and promptly threw it in the trash. In fact, 2 of them called me to let me know what she had done, offering their support. But her attempt, however futile, was another piece of evidence. Attempting to interfere with my livelihood. It was another brick for the wall I was building around her. Just when I thought she couldn't sink any lower, the final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. It came from the most unexpected source imaginable, her own son. A young man, probably in his early 20s, knocked on my door late one evening. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "Are you Mr. Pendleton?" he asked. I confirmed that I was. "My name is Kyle," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm Brenda's son. Can I come in for a second?" I hesitated for a moment, then ushered him inside. He stood awkwardly in my living room, refusing to sit. "I know what my mom has been doing to you," he started, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The chickens, the Facebook posts, the lies. I'm so sorry. She's out of control." He looked deeply ashamed. "I live at home. I work for my dad's construction company. And I see things. My mom, she makes my dad's company bid on all the HOA jobs. Only she tells him what the other bids are before he submits his. And she has him use a different company name, Greenscape Solutions, that's us. That's my dad's crew. My jaw tightened. This was the whistleblower. This was the final, undeniable proof. She's been doing it for years, Kyle continued, his voice cracking. Skimming money. Overcharging for everything. My dad doesn't want to do it, but he's scared of her. Everyone is. But when I saw what she posted about your grandkids, that was it for me. It's disgusting. It has to stop. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and set it on my coffee table. This is everything. Copies of the real invoices next to the ones she submitted to the HOA. Emails between my mom and dad discussing the bids. It's all there. Fraud. Embezzlement. Everything. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Please. Just stop her. I picked up the flash drive. It felt heavy, like a judge's gavel. Thank you, Kyle, I said, my voice quiet. You've done the right thing. The brave thing. He just nodded, turned, and walked out the door, disappearing into the night. I plugged the flash drive into my computer. It was all there, just as he'd said. A systematic, long-term scheme to defraud the homeowners of Northwood Estates. It was organized crime on a suburban scale. The chickens, the fence, the property lines, those were violations of rules. This was a felony. Multiple felonies. The time for HOA meetings and angry letters was over. Armed with proof of serious crimes, it was time to involve higher authorities. The next morning, I called Frank, the retired detective. Frank, I said, my voice steady and cold. I think your friend in the Economic Crimes Unit is going to be very interested in making a new acquaintance. The final showdown required the right venue. A courtroom was an option, but that would take months, even years. I wanted a more immediate, more public resolution. I wanted the community she had lorded over to witness her unmasking. With Frank's guidance and the overwhelming evidence from the flash drive, we went to the district attorney's office. The detective in the Economic Crimes Unit, Frank's friend, took one look at the meticulously organized files, the fraudulent invoices, the incriminating emails, the bank records showing funds being funneled into Brenda's personal accounts, and his eyes lit up. This wasn't a petty neighborhood squabble, this was a prosecutor's dream case. An arrogant, unsympathetic villain and a mountain of irrefutable evidence. They moved fast. But a quiet arrest at her home wasn't what I had in mind. Frank made a suggestion. We need a stage, he said. Let's give her one. The community was already in an uproar over my letter about her patio. Homeowners were demanding a special meeting to address the issue. The HOA president, a man with the spine of a chocolate eclair, had been trying to ignore the calls, but the pressure was mounting. We gave him the final push. My lawyer sent a formal demand for a special meeting, signed by a petition with enough homeowners' signatures to legally compel it. The meeting was set for a Thursday night at the clubhouse. The stated purpose was to discuss a formal complaint regarding unapproved structures on common property and to review the conduct of the Architectural Control Committee. Brenda, trapped by her own rules and the public outcry, had no choice but to attend. Her arrogance was such that she likely believed she could still control the situation, that she could shout down the opposition and bully her way out of it. It was a fatal miscalculation. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only. The entire community was there, drawn by the scent of drama and the promise of a reckoning. I saw Kyle, Brenda's son, standing in the back, his face pale. I had arranged with the DA's office and Frank's detective friend. 2 plainclothes officers would be in the audience. They would not act until I gave a prearranged signal. The stage was set. The players were in position. The final act was about to begin. The HOA president nervously called the meeting to order. He tried to control the proceedings, but the crowd was restless. Finally, he ceded the floor to me. I walked to the front of the room, carrying a single file folder. I felt a strange sense of calm. The engineer in me was simply presenting a final report. Good evening, I began, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. We're here to discuss rules. The rules of our community. For the past several months, I, and many of you, have been subjected to the arbitrary and often illegal enforcement of those rules by one person, Brenda, the chair of the ACC. Brenda, sitting at the head table, shot to her feet. This is a personal attack. I will not stand for these slanderous accusations. Please, sit down, Brenda, I said, my voice flat, not a request but a command. You will have your turn to speak. Right now, it's mine. To my surprise, and the surprise of the room, she sat. The tide of public opinion was so strongly against her that even she could feel it. I started by calmly, methodically dismantling her authority. I presented the city ordinance about my chickens. I read aloud her threatening letters. I showed the picture she took of my grandchildren and explained how she used it to publicly shame my family. With each point, a wave of murmurs and angry whispers rolled through the crowd. Then, I moved to the hypocrisy. I put the annotated plat map up on a projector screen for everyone to see. This is Brenda's patio, I said, pointing with a laser pointer. And this red line is the property line. As you can see, a significant portion of her expensive, unapproved construction is on your land. Land you all pay to maintain. The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing at Brenda. She was ashen-faced, a cornered animal realizing the walls of the trap were solid steel. And finally, I said, my voice dropping slightly, it's not just about the abuse of power. It's about something much more serious. It's about theft. I opened the folder. I have here documentation proving that for the past 5 years, Brenda has been engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud this community. She has been using a shell company, Greenscape Solutions, owned by her family, to award inflated, no-bid contracts for services. She has been rigging bids, faking invoices, and embezzling your HOA fees to fund her lifestyle. I put one of the fraudulent invoices on the screen next to the real one provided by her son. The difference was thousands of dollars. This is just one example, I said. The total amount stolen from this community is estimated to be over $100,000. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The scale of the crime was beyond anything they had imagined. This wasn't a petty tyrant, this was a criminal. Brenda finally broke. She leaped to her feet, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. It was the public meltdown I had anticipated. Lies, she screamed, her voice cracking. They are all lies. You will not ruin me, you old fool. I built this neighborhood. I made it what it is. You all owe me. I can do whatever I want. She had just confessed. In her rage, she admitted her mindset, her entitlement, her belief that she was above the very rules she wielded like a weapon. It was the perfect, self-incriminating exclamation point. That was my signal. I made eye contact with Frank, who nodded to the 2 detectives in the audience. As Brenda continued to rave, pointing at me, at her son, at the crowd, the 2 officers stood up and walked calmly to the front of the room. One of them touched her arm. Brenda, the detective said, his voice calm but firm. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The sight of the badge, the finality in his voice, shattered her. Her face went from red rage to stark white terror. She looked around the room, at the faces of her neighbors, and saw no sympathy. Only disgust and contempt. The house of cards she had built had not just collapsed, it had been incinerated. She tried one last, desperate threat, her eyes locking on me as they cuffed her. You'll pay for this, Pendleton. I'll sue you for everything you have. You'll regret this day for the rest of your life. It was a hollow, pathetic threat from a queen who had just been deposed. I simply looked at her, my expression unreadable, and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. They led her out of the clubhouse, her hysterical shrieks echoing in the stunned silence. The final showdown was over. The tyrant had fallen. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda's downfall was the talk of the town. The local news even picked up the story, local HOA leader arrested for massive embezzlement scheme, her mugshot, featuring a tear-streaked, makeup-smeared face, was plastered everywhere. It was a spectacular fall from grace. The community, liberated from her reign of terror, began to heal. A new HOA board was elected, comprised of reasonable people who actually cared about the neighborhood. The first thing they did was vote to officially dissolve the Architectural Control Committee, declaring it redundant and prone to abuse. The second thing they did was pass a resolution formally apologizing to me and affirming the right of residents to keep backyard hens in accordance with city law. The legal consequences for Brenda were severe. Faced with the mountain of evidence, including her own son's testimony, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. The judge also ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, forcing the sale of her house and its illegal patio, which the new board had voted to have removed, to cover the debt. She lost everything: her freedom, her money, her home, and her reputation. It was a complete and total ruin. As for me, I became something of a reluctant local hero. People would stop me on my walks to thank me. They called me the Chicken Man or the Liberator. I appreciated the sentiment, but I never sought the attention. I was just an engineer who saw a faulty structure and drew up the plans for its demolition. I reflected on it often, sitting on my back porch, watching Henrietta, Petunia, and Gladys peck around the yard. It was never truly about the chickens. It was about the simple, fundamental principle that bullies, no matter how petty or powerful, should not be allowed to win. It was about the idea that rules should be a shield for the community, not a sword for a tyrant. Poetic justice, I mused, is really just a form of elegant engineering. You use the forces of your opponent's own arrogance and corruption to bring about their collapse. My life returned to the peace I had originally sought. In fact, it was better. The neighborhood felt lighter, friendlier. People started talking to each other more. The oppressive cloud of Brenda's rule had been lifted, and sunlight was pouring in. My daughter and grandkids visited all the time, no longer worried about the crazy lady next door. Their laughter was the best sound in the world. One sunny afternoon, my granddaughter sat beside me, feeding lettuce to Petunia. "Grandpa," she said, "you're like a superhero. You saved the neighborhood." I smiled and put my arm around her. "I'm not a superhero, sweetie. I'm just a guy who likes his chickens. And in the end, that's all I ever wanted to be. I had my quiet, my family, and my flock. The project was complete. The structure was sound. And my little corner of the world was finally, truly, at peace."